Hey everyone, have you ever heard of a moment in history so intense that it shook the confidence of an entire era? Well, let me take you back to the summer of 1148, to a dramatic showdown that marked the end of the Second Crusade, the Siege of Damascus. This was supposed to be a grand triumph for the Crusaders, but instead, it turned into a crushing failure that left the European knights questioning their own invincibility. So, here's what went down. The Second Crusade was launched to win back Edessa, a city in Mesopotamia that had been a stronghold for Christians since the First Crusade. But in 1144, the Seljuk Turks captured it, sending shockwaves through Christendom. Pope Eugenius III called for a new crusade, rallying support across Europe with promises of reclaiming holy relics and protecting Christian lands in the Levant. Things started with great ambition. The German king, Conrad III, and Louis VII of France led a massive army, about 60,000 men. They marched to Constantinople, but tensions were already brewing. The Byzantine emperor, Manuel I Komnenos, wasn't exactly thrilled to see these Western forces. To him, they weren't heroes, but potential rivals who might try to grab chunks of his empire. He made them swear loyalty and escorted them through his lands, probably hoping they'd just move along quickly. Then came the disasters. Conrad's forces ignored warnings to stick to the safer coastal routes in Asia Minor, and it ended badly. They were ambushed by Seljuk Turks at Dore-Lyon, leaving their army in shambles. Conrad himself got wounded and had to retreat to Constantinople. Meanwhile, Louis VII's army wasn't faring much better. After one minor victory, they suffered a crushing defeat while crossing the Cadmus Mountains. By the time they limped into Antioch in 1148, both armies were battered, demoralized, and nowhere near their original goal. Here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of focusing on Edessa, the Crusader leaders held a meeting in Acre and decided on a new target, Damascus. Why? Well, Damascus was a prize like no other. It was rich, historically significant, and just close enough to Jerusalem to make it an appealing objective. Plus, the Crusaders feared that the city might join forces with Nur ad-Din, the rising Muslim leader, who had already taken Edessa. Now, Damascus wasn't just any city. It had been a major center of culture and trade, sitting pretty on the Silk Road and surrounded by fertile lands. It was also deeply symbolic. For Christians, nearby Mount Qaisun was linked to Abraham. For Muslims, it was a holy site tied to the Messiah's eventual arrival. And let's not forget the stunning Great Mosque of Damascus, which housed one of Islam's revered relics, the Quran of Caliph Uthman. Taking this city would have been a huge win for the Crusaders. But they were up against a formidable defense. The Muslim ruler of Damascus, Mu'in al-Din Anur, had marshaled a diverse army. There were professional soldiers, local militias, archers from Lebanon, Turkoman, and Kurdish fighters, and even Bedouin allies. Together, they were ready to protect their city against the heavily armed knights of the West. And when the Crusader army, led by Louis VII, Conrad III, and Baldwin III of Jerusalem, marched toward Damascus on July 24, 1148, the defenders were ready. Mu'in al-Din, the commander of Damascus, had already taken precautions by spoiling the water sources along the Crusaders' likely approach routes. This was a huge blow to an invading army that relied on such resources to sustain themselves during a campaign. Still, confident of a quick victory, the Crusaders attacked immediately upon arrival. They divided their forces, with each contingent assigned a leader, and launched their assault. While Baldwin and Louis's forces were held back at the Barada River, Conrad's group managed to break through, pushing the defenders back toward the city walls. But this wasn't an open battlefield where the Crusaders could dominate with their heavy cavalry. The orchards and small walled gardens surrounding Damascus turned into a nightmare for them, ideal terrain for ambushes and guerrilla tactics by the defenders. By the second day, the Crusaders had taken control of the western approach to the city and fortified their position. They built wooden structures from the city's orchards to prepare for a prolonged siege. But as determined as they were, the people of Damascus were just as fiercely committed to holding on to their city. Mu'in al-Din had already sent for reinforcements from Nur ad-Din in Aleppo, and Saif al-Din Ghazi in Mosul. The fighting grew intense. On July 25, the Crusaders moved into the Green Meiding, a grassy area used by Damascus cavalry for training. The defenders launched a counterattack, and while they suffered heavy losses, they cleared enough ground to allow reinforcements from Lebanon to join the fight over the next 2 days. The Crusaders, meanwhile, considered shifting their focus to the city's eastern or southern edges, aiming for weaker gates like the Bab al-Sagir, which was poorly constructed with mud bricks. But this decision only made their situation worse, as those areas were even more challenging to supply with food and water. The city's inhabitants, including villagers and anyone capable of holding a weapon, fought back with incredible resolve. As one account describes, even ordinary people joined the battle, killing Crusader sentries and proudly collecting their enemies' heads as trophies. It was a brutal and chaotic fight. Despite their best efforts, the Crusaders struggled. Food and water ran low. Morale began to falter. Even parading a relic of the True Cross through their camps couldn't turn the tide. Then, on July 28, after just 4 days, the Crusader leaders made a shocking decision. They would abandon the siege. They withdrew the next day, facing constant attacks as they retreated south. So, why did the siege fail so spectacularly? For starters, the Crusaders underestimated both the terrain and the defenders' tenacity. The orchards surrounding the city became a perfect shield for hit-and-run attacks. Local militias harassed the Crusaders relentlessly, cutting off their already strained supply lines. And on top of that, the Crusaders lacked siege engines, making it nearly impossible to breach the city's defenses. There was also plenty of infighting and distrust among the Crusader leaders. Some suspected that the defenders had bribed Christian residents into sabotaging the effort. Others pointed fingers at the Byzantines, claiming they had interfered. Whatever the case, the crusade ended in failure, leaving a bitter taste among the European leaders. Conrad III returned to Europe in September, and Louis VII followed a few months later, disheartened and humiliated. Meanwhile, the Muslim forces grew stronger. Nur ad-Din continued to expand his power, eventually taking Damascus in 1154. This united Muslim Syria under his leadership, and set the stage for even greater threats to the Crusaders in the years to come. The dream of a united Christian front in the Levant was crumbling, and the failure at Damascus was a stark reminder that the era of the First Crusades' easy victories was long gone.